Hey everyone, it's Faye. I wanted to take a few minutes to go over how to read your Warcraft logs so you guys can check it out after we raid and see where your opportunities for improvement exist, also known as issues and problems. So we need to find solutions if something's going wrong, and it's always good to try to improve yourself every day. The address for our Warcraft Logs page is warcraftlogs.com/guilds/6588, and it will take you to a page like this showing a calendar and any logs that are available to review for the current month. And you can change which month you're looking at by hitting the back or forward arrow. Right now, our most recent log was on September 30th, and we were in Emerald Nightmare. I uploaded it, so when you mouse over it, you can see which bosses we killed. And if we had any wipes, it would also show that in red text, but we actually killed all 5 bosses on normal and had no wipes, so you only see green. Let's go ahead and click on it, and it'll bring up the details page, the summary page. This is what the page looks like when you first open it to the summary page. That's the default. The default boss up here in the left corner is the last one that we killed for the night, so that was Dragons of Nightmare, and it goes in order. We killed Nythendra, then Il'gynoth, Elrith, Ursoc, then Dragons of Nightmare. Now, if we had wiped, it would show next to 1 kill, it would show, 2 wipes or whatever it was. But like I said, since we killed all 5 without any wipes, that's what it shows right there in that menu. So I'm going to click on Nythendra. Down here, it shows, it would show a list of all the different attempts that we made. So if we had wipes, there would be more than this one. And it shows normal kill, normal being the difficulty of the raid, and it shows the time that it took. It took us 6 minutes, 8 seconds, and we started my time, because I'm the one who uploaded the logs, 8:35 p.m. Now, depending on which boss we're killing, there's different phases in the fight, so you can focus, you can either look at all phases, which is what it defaults to. You can look at the normal phase, which in the case of Nythendra is going to be the part where she's up and about. And then the Heart of Swarm phase is the part where she's laying down on the ground and all the green pools are heading towards her and the insects are jumping up and hitting people. For now, we're going to keep it on all phases. And you can see here, all friendlies gives a menu of the different players who were active during this boss kill particularly, or specifically. And so if you wanted to look at certain people, if you wanted to look at your own logs, then you could click on your name here. Right now we're going to keep it on everybody though. You can also switch it to enemies, and you would see a drop down with the different enemies that are involved. So there's Nythendra, and there's corrupted vermin, and apparently there were 18 different corrupted vermin. So, but we're just going to switch it back to friendlies. The bar along here lets you focus on different types of data. So damage done is something you can look at. You can zero in on a little more closely, and then damage taken, healing, buffs, debuffs, deaths, interrupts, dispels, resources, and casts. Over here is more options, but these are probably going to be the main ones that you'll want to focus on. Damage done, especially if you're a DPS, healing, and dispels if you're a healer. Another thing that the DPS will want to look at is buffs and interrupts, because you guys need to keep your damage dealing buffs going, and also you're supposed to be interrupting normally, usually during the boss fight, so you want to make sure that you handled interrupts correctly. This graph in the middle here shows different types of things that happened during the fight. So the timestamps are down the bottom here, and remember it took us 6 minutes 8 seconds to do the fight, so that's why you see 6 minutes worth of data right here. per second amount is here, so you're seeing damage per second with the blue, damage done per second. The red is damage taken, so during certain points in the fight we were taking more damage than others. The green is going to be healing done. You're not seeing that one right now. And healing received is the yellow line. So obviously you would assume that when the damage ramps up, when the red bar goes up, you would see increases in the healing received as well. This blue shading right here on the left means that we heroed on the pull. The blue shading is the Heroism Phase. And then also right down here, you can ignore events after however many players have died. So for example, if one person was alive at the very end of the fight for, 30 seconds, a minute, and everybody else was dead, then you could actually narrow down the data time frame to a smaller time frame in order to get a better view of what was actually going on with DPS and healing during the core part of the fight. Down here is the raid composition, and remember this is applicable only to this boss on this attempt right here. So our two tanks were Angel and Skada. Here are all of our DPS, and here are the healers that we had during the fight, and our average item level was 845.8. Now if you wanted to see one person's summary, then you could just click on their name and it would narrow down all the data to them. But we're going to keep it on the summary right now. These different sections here, damage done by source, healing done by source, damage taken by ability, and deaths. So for example, under deaths, you can see the timestamp of when the person died, so you can see who died first and who died last, and you can see what the killing blow was. So for example, Remorse and Jinx were finally done in by Burst of Corruption. And if you mouse over the icon, it'll remind you what that ability is. So Burst of Corruption is inflicts damage, plague damage to all players within 8 yards. In addition, the toxic residue increases the damage of Burst Corruption by 75% for 5 seconds. This effect stacks. And then Volatile Rot, this is the thing that affects the tanks. If you're not far enough away from the tanks, you're going to take more Volatile Rot damage than the rest of the people. And, a death from this could be due either to the tank not moving or the person being too close to the tank when they did move. So it could be either person's fault when that happens. Infested Breath, that's a mechanic that is a frontal cone. Everybody is supposed to move out of that, and then Infested Ground is standing in poo. Rot would be the debuff that people get, and they're supposed to move to the outer edge of the room to drop their green pool. So those are just some examples of things that people died from, and then what you can do is, if you died from one of these things, you can look at this and say, oh, okay, I know what I did wrong. I shouldn't have done that, etc. I'm not calling anybody out here. I'm just explaining what you can do with this data. Damage done by source, that's going to show the different players. It shows how much overall damage they did, so 96 million by Kargam. DPS was 260k, and then Kargam did 9.84% of the damage. Healing done by source, JC here, he did 24.85% of healing. He did 70 million total healing, and his HPS was 190k. Damage taken by ability. This is something you would use to determine who was standing in the poo, who was standing in the frontal cone ability, who took damage from getting aggro on the boss or the ads. Melee, if you're hit by melee, it's usually because you somehow got aggro, and so on. So this, again, is how we would determine who was not where they were supposed to, who was not moving when they should, who was standing there instead of, getting out of the way or getting out of the poo. That's what this area means. So if you're a DPS, you probably want to look at damage done. So let's just look at the overall damage done by clicking on damage done. Again, it shows the ramp ups and downs, and here's where it finally ends. Again, timestamps, DPS over on the left. That's what this graph represents. If you wanted to limit who you're seeing, you could just click on the name of the person. It defaults to total damage. Over here, this performance percent column means your overall performance for doing damage on this fight. And this is a percentile, and when you mouse over it, it shows results shown are compared against all public parses uploaded in the last 2 weeks. That means this is actually comparing against the rest of the world's logs. So for this fight, Kargam was in the 83rd percentile for Enhancement Shaman, who fought Nithendra on normal ability. If we are on Heroic, it would be comparing his DPS against people who did Heroic, their data. Over here, it shows the item level of the person, and also when you mouse over them, it shows their gear that they were using, so that's pretty cool. Item level percent, the tooltip here says results shown are compared against all public parses uploaded in the last 2 weeks, same as the left column, but what it does is it compares how you performed versus your eye level. So compared to people who were in the range of 855 to 857 eye level, who are Enhancement Shaman, Kargam performed in the 39th percentile. So what that usually means is that this fight is better geared toward, certain classes than others. And what it's saying is he should have done better for this type of fight at that eye level. No offense, Kargam. Whereas Mesk here, it's actually funny. He was in the 74th percentile for marksmanship hunters that did normal in the last 2 weeks on Nithendra. But because his performance against his item level was really good, he actually ranked higher in item level rankings. So at 847 item level, he apparently was not supposed to do this well, but he did. He was in the 84th percentile. Active shows whether people were inactive for a large portion of the time. So Kargam was active 99.4% of the time, whereas some people down here had pretty big gaps in their activity. I'm not sure. Okay, DPS while active. So that means this is DPS captured only while active. And of course over here is the DPS that they did. If you wanted to focus on yourself, for instance, we can click on Kargam and see how his damage done breaks down. So 24% of his damage came from Storm Strike, 18.6 came from Frostbrand, Boulder Fist was next, Flame Tongue was next, etc. So over here it shows the total damage that came from this ability. It shows the number of casts that were made of this ability. It shows the average amount, DPS that it did. Your hits, the number of times that the spell actually hit something. So not necessarily a wasted cast, it actually hits something. The average hit was only 116.4k, and it crit 23.7 of the time. This over here would show if the ability missed. So for example, melee, he hit 14, or he missed 14.8% of the time. So it means he missed or parried. You know, you can see the hover over shows the missed percent and the parried percent. So here is also a graph showing things when things happened. When you mouse over these different spells, it'll show a breakdown of hits, critical hits, blocked hits. And so on. Now, what you might want to do if you're a Kagam is click on Buffs and check to see whether you had good buff uptime. And what that means is whether you kept your dots active, whether you had your different buffs active on yourself for your damage dealing abilities. It also captures whether you are using a flask and food during the fight, and he was 100% of the time. Usually if it's the lower percent, then it either wore off during the fight or you died and you couldn't reapply, you know, like your well-fed buff. So it shows that for Frostbrand he had 98.21% uptime, which is really good. You know, there's tiny gaps in here where he didn't have it active. This is something, if it was a low percent and he's supposed to try and get 100% uptime on that, then he would be able to see, oh, okay, I didn't do as well in this. Therefore, next time we kill this boss, I need to focus on that. Some of these abilities, if you mouse over the ability, it'll remind you what this one does. So this is kind of a proc. That's why it's not active the whole time. But, you know, there are certain things you can do to improve your uptime on procs. So he would want to see, okay, I only had it up 52.94% of the time. What can I do to improve the uptime on that, if anything? It also shows the heroism. Now keep in mind, this is a timeline. So it actually shows you when we cast heroism in here. And what you would want to do is look at the same time frame here. You know, you can determine, well, here's where it's active. What did I have up at this time? And you can tell from that, did I use my cooldowns when I was supposed to? Because you're supposed to use cooldowns in Heroism Phase usually. And that's something that you would want to use to improve your gameplay. So that's the buffs section. And that was for damage buffs. Now further down here are defensive buffs. Well-fed is considered a defensive buff. Astral Shift for Shaman is something that you use in order to decrease your damage taken. So you can see he used it at the very beginning, he used it here, and he used it here. And you could, you know, kind of determine, well, I should have used this more often, or I should have, you know, I used it as often as I should. You know, when you mouse over it, it shows this is a 1.5 minute cooldown, so he used it, you know, fairly frequently. Healing buffs here, it actually shows heals that were cast on him. So rejuvenation he didn't have very often during the fight. That's probably because he didn't take very much damage. That's usually why if you don't have a lot of hots on you, it's because you're not taking damage and therefore not worth putting a hot on. No offense. Atonement, he was hit 3 different times with Atonement, and etc. So this is just all the different healing spells that hit him and during which time frames. And heroism is apparently a healing buff. Movement buffs, if you have you know, a movement cooldown, or if you were hit with one, such as Stampeding Roar, you know, this would be when the druid cast Stampeding Roar, etc. And then it shows your different stances when those were active. Under damage taken, if you click on that, again, since we're only looking at Kargam, it'll show how much. This is a timeline, and then this is just the amount. So this one here isn't a timeline. He wasn't taking Volatile Rot the entire time. But it shows the breakdown. So Volatile Rot was 45% of the damage that he took, and then Rot, Infested Ground, Burst of Corruption. And so this 54 cast means he was hit 54 times by Burst of Corruption, I guess. Or actually, it was cast 54 times. It hit him one time, so he didn't take that much damage. He didn't hit that many times from Burst of Corruption. And then it shows the average hit here. So that hit was 493k. It's a good amount. Under healing, if he was a healer, you would want to see how you performed there. So I'll just go ahead and switch the character to mine. And then you can see the breakdown of my healing spells and when they were used. So the amount of healing that I did with Tranquility was 24.56%. That was a huge amount of my healing on that fight. It just shows a breakdown of how many times it crit, how many are the uptime on it, etc. And then overheal, you know, not really much I can do about that because there's people who have shields, but I digress. Rejuve I had active on people 22% of the time. That's really not representative of, or no, sorry, Rejuvenation, the amount of my healing that it did was 22%. The uptime was 97.63%, so I had Rejuvenation going on somebody almost all the time. Wild Growth was 9.8% of my, healing. The one that I would be concerned about is when I'm looking at my own data down here, Life Bloom. It was only 2.41% of my healing, and the reason that is because it was active only 52% of the time. That's awful. So with Life Bloom, I should have that active all the time. It should always be on the tank, but I was apparently very distracted and was not paying attention to my Life Bloom. So that is something I definitely would take away from this boss kill, reviewing my logs, and I would fix it next time. So that's the healing tab. Now, if this was a fight where dispels were needed, then I would want to click on dispels and look at that data. But as you can see, this fight required no dispels. Therefore, there are no dispels. Interrupts here, this wasn't a fight that required interrupts, so there's nothing there. And deaths, I actually died during this fight. Wow, I didn't do very well during this fight. I died. But okay, what it was, I died from Hilarian's Rot. It shows when I mouse over here. And it also shows the last 3 hits that I took before dying. So it shows timestamps. So I took Environment, Volatile Rot. It means I took some damage from the tank's Volatile Rot. Then I also got myself with Rot. I must have been running towards the wall and dropping it and just didn't move fast enough. And then Hilarion hit me with her Rot for a very small amount because I only had 1,741 health left at that point. Sorry about that. Anyway, I must have clicked on something. Alright, so it actually shows here how much healing I received during these last 3 hits. So I did actually receive 234k in healing during that time. However, yeah, it didn't help. Yeah, it just wasn't enough because I got hit for 519k, and then I got hit for 234k, and then I got hit for 1741. Anyway, moving on, debuffs. This right here, you would want to look at it, and you can tell from here, it's usually related to how much damage you took. So exhaustion, since we used heroism at the start of the fight, we were affected by the, heroism debuff for the rest of the fight. I took some there was a dot on me for rot, or this is how much time I had rot on me during these parts. This is, you know, a timestamp kind of thing. It's not amount. And there we go. So those are the things, that's the way you would look at the data and how you would look at your own data, just choosing from the drop down and selecting yourself. And that's how you look to see what happened during a fight, how you did, what you can improve, whether you use the correct timing. If it was a fight with interrupts, did you interrupt enough? If it was a fight with dispels, did you dispel enough? And how your buffs, how you handled your buff uptime. So definitely buffs is a big one, is a big focus for both healing and DPS, because buffs are buffs. They affect how you do with your healing and how you do with your DPS. So definitely focus on that one. Focus on damage done, and also focus on damage taken, because if you are taking a lot of damage, that's an issue. And this is probably going to affect whether you live or die during a fight. You know, you can't DPS when you're dead. You can't heal when you're dead. So very important to minimize your damage that you take. Again, this is the expansion of personal responsibility. So please be responsible for yourself. The healers can't heal stupid. We can't heal through everything. Just be on the lookout. Also, if you used a healing potion, it would also appear in here. So if you're looking at the data and you show that the healing, either that you received or whatever, did not include a healing potion, that's a problem, because I could have perhaps saved myself by using a healing potion right before I died. So my own fault. And that's what you do with the logs. So if you have any questions about how to read your logs, be sure to ask us, and we will go over it with you and help you improve. Thanks.